we are and we must be an open and public conspiracy to topple the system. I agree that we are and we must be an open and public conspiracy, and I'm going to talk about that and why we have to be open and public. But I have a minor quibble. I believe that since the system is going to do a fine job of collapsing on its own, and since we, like everyone else, lives in and by virtue of the system and are not apart from it, that we are and we must be an open and public conspiracy to survive the collapse of the system. Survival means win. Survival and winning mean separating from the system as it starts to come apart, as everyone else will, because if you think of the system as Leviathan, I wrote an essay years ago, Leviathan will eat itself. When it can no longer keep growing, it will eat itself. Later I came to think that this was a bad metaphor simply because analogizing anything to an individual organism, such as a Leviathan eating and coming to the end of its growth, a biological organism is such a special thing that analogies of anything else, a state, a people, a system, to it are usually rife with false parallels because metazoans, multicelled creatures, are so different from anything else. But if anybody wants to hear more about that, you can bring it up in the question period. But anyway, the system's going to collapse on its own. The important thing is that when Leviathan begins to eat itself, and this is why Leviathan is a bad metaphor, because an organism cannot turn against itself and start to eat itself. I mean, there's a process of catabolysis, like in starvation, but it's not really where a part fights against the whole. And the fact is that the supposed imperative for global growth in our economy, that the world has to keep growing and growing, there is no actual imperative for global growth. The imperative is local, it's not global. So the imperative is that this place keeps growing. I keep eating, I keep having children, my business keeps getting more income every year. The imperative is not that it be global. And so when the global system can no longer grow, those two facts instantly combine to show you that it will eat itself. So parts will try to grow at the expense of other parts. And that's actually why Leviathan is a bad metaphor, because a biological organism cannot turn itself against itself in that way. And the reason a biological organism can't is because the fate of the genes in every cell in your body is constrained to lie with the fate of the germline, of the special reproductive organs, and of the whole organism together. And that's actually an interesting fact. And ant colonies are actually a sort of midway case between organism and group, or ant bee colonies. And that's because they've actually invented special reproductive genetics to increase their interest in each other's reproductive fitness in such a way that it doesn't make sense for any of the workers to rebel, even if they could have their own children, because they're more closely related to their own sisters than they would be to their own children. That's a special fact, and again, that's probably far from what we're interested in today. Okay. So, we are and we must be an open and public conspiracy to survive the collapse of the system by winning. Why do we have to be open and public? Because there are many who say that we should adopt instead a dual discourse, a Straussian tactic of exoteric and esoteric meanings. Does everybody pretty much know what that dual strategy is? No? Well, there's this man named Leo Strauss who taught at the University of Chicago, who was a Jew, and consciously so. And he was very influential. Some of his students went on to become the famous neocons in America. But he taught in such a way, he mostly taught the history of philosophy. And he thought that the great philosophers in history all had codes hidden in their texts in such a way that they could say one thing but not be executed for it by the tyrant by seeming to say another thing. So there's an outside message which the world understands. There's an inside message which only the adepts get. And in his own teaching in political philosophy, I believe Shadia Drury in her book makes a convincing case for this. Kevin MacDonald sort of agrees that you remember Plato's analogy where you have the philosopher kings and then you have the gentlemen. you have the rulers, the philosophers and then the rulers, not one philosopher king, but you have the rulers and then the philosophers. And in Strauss's case, the gentlemen that he was training at the University of Chicago were the Gentiles who would go on to positions of power and influence. And the philosophers were, of course, almost entirely Jewish. And so you were actually supposed to get two different messages from his teaching, depending on whether you were Jewish or not. And the idea of interior and exterior discourse, or esoteric and exoteric, is called Straussian for that reason. Is that sufficient? Okay. There are many who say that we should adopt instead a dual discourse, a Straussian tactic, esoteric and exoteric meanings. By mimicking the so far very successful procedures of our enemy, we will gradually defeat him. This is not possible for us. First, we are congenitally unsuited to such tactics. I won't say anything more about that. Secondly, they are too slow. We cannot wait for generations to pass. We do not have 1,000 years to construct, to gradually retake civilization while somehow it doesn't collapse by other. The crisis of our civilization is already upon us. I mean, I don't believe we have a decade. We certainly don't have 1,000 years to work on this. Third, and most important, only a public strategy allows for the possibility of assistance. By which I mean this. If a man is, suppose a man is out on a lonely moor somewhere, or drowning in the middle of the ocean, and he doesn't know that there's anybody within earshot. Nevertheless, he doesn't whisper, "Help, help." He doesn't whisper for help into his sleeve. He yells as loudly as he can. Because if somebody is within earshot, that the only way that he has a chance of calling on assistance from people that he doesn't know about is by doing so in a loud way. And I believe that we need assistance from people that haven't shown up yet to the table. And even people that we have no idea of now. And I don't even say people. I just say assistance. I'm not even going to constrain it to being any person in particular or even being a person. All I'm saying is we have to ask for assistance publicly. And the fourth reason is that by speaking in public, one makes oneself a target and a leader. Heads above the parapet, you know? One gets shot down, somebody else may stand up. Let's hope so. We need a European revolutionary ultra-elite. This elite is now hidden. They cannot be expected to parse a cryptic, esoteric message and reveal themselves simply because we need them. Especially not, of course, if they have to wake up first. It doesn't matter whether you call it the European Revolution, Imperium Europa, or eco-national futurism, or, thank you, Alistair, Aryan futurism. I think we all know what we're talking about. The essential question is us, who we are, and we don't have to at this point define, decide, exclude. We have a pretty good idea. Let's go from here. I thought I would talk much more than, in fact, I am talking, about how our enemies use discourse to war against us. But in fact, this topic is extensively covered elsewhere, and I think my time would be better served simply by pointing you to that if you're not aware of it already. If anyone here has not read Kevin MacDonald's Culture of Critique, cover to cover, any of his work is good. The preface to the Culture of Critique, the revised preface, is available online. But you should get this book and read it cover to cover. If you have any doubt, it will show you so much. The short version was that thing I already told you about those who put around the story about them and us. The lie of universalism is the lie of the struggle against the struggle of existence, the war against nature. It is not nature that they or we are at war with. You can't fight against nature. Because fighting against nature is part of nature too. Evolution works through selection and requires the repetition of similar sets of circumstances to select organisms that will reliably manage to propagate themselves in those circumstances. But the current crisis, and in fact the whole technological world we have created, are circumstances that will not ever be repeated and can never be repeated. So there is a sense in which culture